Vision Radio 345 in conversation.
Hi, today I'll be talking to Berisford, Tullah.
Hello.
We'll be talking about community affairs, and that's something that's close to his heart, the community and people in the community and what we do in the community. So, Berisford, without further ado, let's just go straight into this. The history of the community centre, that is where I'm going to start, because you are a man who's been around for quite a long time, actually, and you've been doing some work around our communities. So give us an idea of what kind of stuff you were doing and the history of where you was when community centres opened.
Community centres. Well, the concept of what was then called, or we call community centres, but 1970s, these things started about. 80s. At the time, they had something called the Greater London Council, the GLC.
Okay.
And the community centres were effectively places, they were more cultural centres. They were places where people went, you organised your dominoes or you made carnival costumes. But it was just basically a place for people to get together.
Okay.
You had different community centres. I mean, you had Asian community centres and the Turkish ones and the Afro-Caribbean one and whatever. But basically, that's what they were. They were just places that people got together.
Okay, and what were the kind of opening times? Because that's important, because sometimes, obviously, not everybody was working. So were they open at a certain time, like in the mornings and close, and then open in the evenings? How did that work?
Well, that's the thing about it, that there wasn't any general rule in those times. They weren't organised.
Okay.
So basically people applied for certain funding within the area, and it was up to them what they provided, different hours. Some people included dancing in it, and other people didn't. They just,
So it's more like tailor-made to whoever comes in and what activity they wanted to put on.
Well, it was basically up to those who were running it, the management committees or whatever, to decide what was going on in the place. There wasn't any really set rules, given that if you ran a community centre, this is what you did with it.
Okay.
Which was all new there, cowboy town.
Okay. So what do you think that community centres are not... So why do you think that community centres are not around like they used to be? Because we see that now happening within communities, that they're kind of really pulling back on funding streams and so forth and so on. What do you think about that?
What do I think about that? The question as to why they don't exist anymore is a varied thing. Not just about the money. The financial side of it was that the GLC provided money. They gave all these organisations were built up. Okay, the GLC as a body disappeared, and so the funding was changed. It wasn't the same government. Took more control of it rather than allow regional places to just hand out money. The funding side of it started to disappear for all the voluntary sector, not just community centre. The old voluntary sector started to get squeezed. As time got passed on, it turned to what they call the European Social Fund. So government started putting less and less money into it, and if you wanted to progress or to do anything, you had to go towards this European Social Fund. I mean, that's going to disappear now because of Brexit and all that kind of thing. And I'll show that side of it. But that went away.
Okay.
So the old industries changed, and so instead of where you used to be able to run a community centre, and basically it was up to each individual community centre what they did, it started to become funding for specific things. So everything had to change. Instead of where you had to sort of adjust your project to the criteria so you could get the money.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so it's like more like like an application you would put in, and that money would be directed to that specific workshop.
Yeah, so specific things were funded. Other things like that just wasn't funded. So they got more control of the system.
So from your experience, I mean, how do you now, in the 21st century, define a community centre, and what's important about that?
Wow. The community centre... You talk about community. That is two words there. Community is not one word, it's two words.
Okay.
You know, and the idea of community is that those things that you have in common, you unify around. That doesn't mean you're going to agree on every things, but you know, whether it is, I think whether it's gender or religion or race, or you know, whatever you have in common, you use that to unify you, right? So that's where you get in terms of community. Do you know what I mean?
So give us a little example of that. I know you said wherever you have in common. So how does that kind of look?
For instance, most of what I've dealt with was be the Afro-Caribbean community. Although we're not, just because you're Afro-Caribbean doesn't mean that you agree on everything or you're going through the same problem, though you have common things in. Yeah, you have things in common.
Yeah.
And through those things you unify. You don't have to agree on everything.
Yeah.
But because the reality is also that Afro-Caribbean community are in a different position from every other community in it, and we have to kind of recognise that, and only we can understand that community or the issues that we're really going through. There's nobody else can understand that, so we can unify around those issues to try and change things.
Okay. So you could just. I'm just going to go into just a little bit more before I go on to the next question. Is so what kind of activities do they have? I know you mentioned some, and you said they have a lot of things in common. So do they have any sports activities? I know you mentioned dominoes, but do they have a wider program set out?
Community centres as such? No, they don't, because they're running individually. That's the issue. There is no connection. You know, everybody's trying to do their own little things, and it doesn't make sense. But the idea of community centres isn't about community centres linking just with other community centres. It's about linking with the community. You know? And under that, I say, well, my thoughts on community centres is that they're there to create a community. You know, there's this term that we talk about the Afro-Caribbean community, but no such thing exists. It doesn't. You have Afro-Caribbean people living in the same area. That does not make them a community, because there's no unity. They're not centered around anything. They're not getting together to try and solve the problem. So there is actually no community. It's a neighborhood or whatever, but it's not a community.
Yeah. So, so what about other organisations apart from the government, who you can say play a major role in our community, apart from the government funding and so on? What other people play a part in that?
Can I come on to that later? Can I take on the government? Because I think that's the essential part of it, is that our funding essentially has been about government and the institution and whatever. Unlike successful communities in the country who fund their community centres and how they build it. I will come on to that.
Yeah, but maybe I'm going a bit too fast here. I'm going to let you finish, me.
They build their community centres, because we totally depend on funding.
Yeah,
right? That holds us back, right? Because in reality, let me give you an example now. Most of the community centres that were established from all over London, they were given in buildings that were old buildings.
Okay,
you know, not churches, perhaps. Old schools, old councils, things like that. The government had local council had a building. People went along and go, we see, identify that building. We could have those things.
Yeah.
Now those buildings are on prime real estate. You take, for instance, an old school. There's a lot of land there.
Yeah.
So where these organisations are looking towards the council funding bodies to give them their money. And the funding bodies are thinking, well, hold on a minute, we're putting money into this old building to keep it going, when we could knock it down and put a 10-story block of flat and everybody make money. Right?
Okay.
So that's an important. So we generally are fighting a losing cause, really, because money is going to win in the end of the day.
Yeah. So they're not putting it there for the right cause. They're taking it away for other reasons.
Yeah, they're taking it away because she's sitting on prime real estate.
Yeah. I mean, you do see that. You see buildings knocked down. I mean, there's quite a few around the area where we are, where they've regenerated certain areas and they've taken out a building what used to be a primary place for young people to go to. The place where you said people commute, people communicate and coming together as a community. And those things are slowly slipping away. But you're right, some of the buildings that they have are buildings that belong to the establishment, so to speak. And whenever they're ready to take that back, they would, at the cost of the community, which is quite sad because, as we can see, that's declining as we go along. And I don't know when we're going to get that back, but yeah, you've got.
I don't think there's going to be any kind of reversal, because the reality is the thing. If you've got a community centre and it's occupying a big piece of land, and the council are funding it and it's restricted, they're going to take it away.
Yeah.
It's going to do it. You know, what we need to do is that, okay, you take it away. You're going to take it. We'll get it. We'll get it as real estate, but help us to get something else. You know, put some input in it, because it's needed within. It's.
And do you see that happening?
No, it's not happening, because there's no unity in the community. There's no organisations. There's no people not there to demand it. You're only going to get things when you fight for it, really, aren't you?
Yeah, and that
Christmas is not real.
Yeah, and that means that's why the community is important, to come together and stand together and fight for that place.
Yeah.
Now I'm gonna go on to that question, the one you asked me, the one I was supposed to ask you. So, what about other organisations apart from the government? Because we already established that where they're at with the whole thing with the community, and we can clearly see that there's a loss there to the community. So, what about the other organisations apart from the government who you can say play a major role in our community? So, apart from them, what other organisations do you see
play a major role in our community? My biggest gripe, or one of my biggest gripes, I've got a lot of big gripes, is the church. You know, because I feel that there's a lot of people there into their churches and they go to church regularly. I don't think churches are supposed to be there for people to make money. You know, maybe I'm not throwing a blanket over everybody, but I feel that if the church is supposed to be there to be part of the community. You know, it's no point of it existing if it's not part of the community. You can't deal with people just on a Sunday morning or 2-3 times a week, and you have a little prayer and you whatever, and then they go back to their misery, and then you don't take it on. You know, if the people come to the church is supposed to be going out there. And I see it as an essential part of all those people who say that they're Christian. I'm like, well, if you're not really doing those works, then what kind of Christian are you? What kind of thing? And I think the churches have to get above just praising.
Inside the building.
Inside the building. Yeah. That's not what the church is.
And I think, to be fair, there are some people out there who are doing that, but as I've kind of mentioned to you before we started, that is happening, but it's just not been seen enough. And I think if it's seen enough, then it will make sense. It will tie in exactly with what you've just said. That's what needs to be seen.
I'm not sure that it is happening, though. I'm not sure that it is happening.
That's another convo, really. That's another convo. But yeah, I mean,
we've got to go beyond. I applaud the idea of food banks and handing out food and all the rest of it, but that doesn't really help the problem, does it? And the churches have the ability to organise with one another, so it doesn't have to be. You know, churches can do something that the community centres could never do, because the churches can actually link.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so that they're not replicating the same thing. Everybody's doing exactly the same thing.
Yeah. And I think, it's a good point. 'Cause I remember going to, when I was young, I used to go to the mum used to take me to church, but the same church had a youth centre there, and that's where I used to go. So I get that. You know, they can probably do that, but as you said, people are doing things and some people are not. But it's an individual perspective, I suppose.
But it shouldn't be, should it?
No.
It should be a collective.
Yeah, it should be a collective. So there's still work to be done.
But there's always going to be work to be done. And if we don't do it, nobody's going to do it. It's just not going to get done.
So what do you think community centres should be used for?
I think I'm taking it literally, the community centre. So I think community centres, if they're going to get anywhere, they need to be at the centre of the community. It's about organising. You know, it's about coming together, so the community centre will come together. earlier on we were talking about the funding, okay? And we talked about the history of community centres. Now, one of the reasons that the community centres are being get rid of is that initially, as I said, they were about cultural centres, so it's all right if we're organising little dances and with the costumes and whatever, playing the dominoes. But within the community centres, people started thinking, well, now we've got this thing, so we might as well kind of use it. So they decided to organise themselves, activities started coming. People say, so the government was, well, hold on, we're funding these community centres so these people can get together to organise to fight us. So it doesn't make any sense to them. So that's also part of why the community centres were taken down or have got to disappear, because they recognise the value of what it could do. If it's somewhere that people got together and it made a real fundamental difference to their lives.
Okay. So, you know what, Beres, it's been really interesting talking to you, because you've got quite a lot to say that I know that... that will just continue. Just quickly before we kind of wrap things up, how's your website going? That's something I wanted to talk about. Your website, how's it going?
It's still there. It's still floating through the
atmosphere.
The atmosphere, you know. Yeah, blacktowermedia.com. It's going through changes. It started in 2016, and it needs a real update,
like a revamp.
Things are changing, but it's still out there. You can still look out there and see what's there. Get interested, find out about the 13 tribes and who we are. Yeah,
interesting.
I suggest that you look at that. Think on.
Okay, thank you very much, Berisford, and we'll probably catch up again and catch up with another great conversation. Been very, very interesting and informative, especially about the community, because as we know, things are still drawing back, and you know, these things can spiral into a catastrophe if we're not careful. But yeah, thank you very much for coming along. Thank you.
You're more than welcome.
To leave your comments or views about any of our podcast episodes, go to visionradio345@gmail.com.